The road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is how I realised that I was gay at 27. There's a lot to unpack here. My experience in coming out is atypical but not unique. It does happen. I think it's a lot closer to that of a late bloomer lesbian rather than most gay men, at least judging from videos I've seen online. Yeah, one of the factors that kind of influenced my story was my worldview, political, social. About the age of 16, I had sought refuge in sort of more centre-right leaning politics, more conservative. The appeal there was in familial values. I think just generally looking at the political landscape now, I just generally struggle to identify with the core message of the LGBT community. It just doesn't sit well with me. Group identity, post collectivism, and I think to add to that, there's a really deep yearning for spirituality in my life, and the impetus for that has always been sort of hardship and just ongoing bad mental health. So that's a little preface to my story, which I'll try to unpack a little bit. Growing up, I think my first conscious memory of experiencing, I suppose, feelings towards someone of my own sex, my gender, was probably from around 18. This was towards someone close, a close friend, I suppose. I remember at the time I just kind of brushed that off as something else. I can't be experiencing feelings for this person. No way. No, I'm just like everyone else, you know. I think coming to think of it now, I should have probably recognised that my orientation wasn't like everybody else's at around 12. There were some signs then, but that didn't really. I was too young to recognise, too young to be really kind of, what would be the right word? Couldn't think critically nor observe myself really. Yeah, it was around about 23. I remember admitting to my therapist at the time that I might be a bisexual, but I was doing a course in EMDR at the time, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's used for healing trauma. It's also used by like veterans and things of that sort. So people who see their comrades' limbs being blown off by a mine. So during childhood, I grew up with an emotionally abusive stepmom for whom I had some attraction. I suppose sensual, which then turned, I guess, into sexual during puberty. I think I still identify somewhere in the bisexuality spectrum, but I think I'm predominantly same-sex attracted. My stepmom was she was an evil woman, let's just put it that way. I think she was either a narcissist or bipolar, so very turbulent, very like this, you know, she would scream, shout, she was abusive, trying to really dig into your emotions, trying to really hurt you emotionally. I got caught in the crosshairs between her and my mum fighting over inheritance from my dad when I was like 7. My stepmom also came from a bit more of she wasn't well cultured, let's say. She openly discussed sexuality around kids. Yeah, I remember there was one memory from when I'm about 8 or so years old, where I was staying with my dad and my stepmom, and I was in the opposite room to where they were staying, and I remember not wanting to go to bed, and I remember coming into their room and trying to tell my dad that, I kind of want to play, and this had obviously set her off, and she was basically saying, tell your kid to go to the other room because I want to have sex. And she was shouting those things. So yeah, that was a good 3 years of that, and then when I would come back to visit my dad once a year, there was more of that because I stayed at their house. It was just a really turbulent relationship. As I said, she was an evil woman. So this really drastically influenced my view of sexuality and sexual behavior and morality. And I started to kind of really develop that at around 16 or so. And it was a response to how I had felt at the time, because of onset of anxiety and low moods that come out at that age. But I think, basically just misdiagnosed my problem. I had thought that my parents getting a divorce and the abuse that I faced from my stepmom had been the culprit for how I had felt. And when in reality, the source of my problems was the fact that I wasn't straight and I wasn't like everyone else. My teens were completely devoid of any romance. So were my early 20s. And thereafter, I didn't get to explore my sexual identity until I was 26. Whilst I felt like everyone else was doing that when I was like 16, 18. I couldn't attract women. I never felt comfortable revealing that side of myself to someone. And this was like a really big issue in my life that sort of hung over my kind of my being, let's say. I wrongfully attributed this lack of confidence and lack of results to my stepmom, and yeah, how that affected my confidence. For many years, I was just lonesome, and I'd get to bed and I'd ruminate about my life, and I'd recall those experiences that I went through of abuse as a young child. That was also typically accompanied by a sexual fantasy from my stepmom. I think in reality, I was probably always just weakly attracted to women. That was also the thing that allowed me to convince myself that I was straight. So yeah, I had thought that for many years my lack of romance in my life was the source of my unhappiness. Meeting my ex-girlfriend. So I met her at 26. We connected over a dating app. We matched, and I was interested straight away, just based on her profile. She was also the first person with whom I exchanged more than a handful of messages. We spoke for about 2 months before I asked her to send over her number, and that was pretty much the first date that I had ever organised off my own accord with someone. I was 26 at the time. By about 25, my mum had started to get worried, and she actually set up a blind date with my neighbour. I digress. Yeah, so I went out, and this was in a city about 3 hours away from where I live now, and we met. Yeah, she was Christian. She had a strong spiritual identity. She spoke my mother tongue. We both came from Eastern Europe at a similar age, so both immigrants. We had similar personalities, sort of reserved, modest, meek. I say that, but yeah, I don't know. That's just a characterization I feel. Could be wrong. We had similar familial values, so very much oriented around family, and that was really a thing that drew me to her. So we just clicked instantly, basically, and I had never experienced a connection like that with probably anyone, just based on my experience of being, from a different country, meeting someone who also was like me. And at first, speaking to her felt like speaking to a lost part of myself. But I think I probably began to develop feelings for her before I even met her, which kind of goes back to the question of what is love, but in the way that I experienced it, at least. But we can come back to that. So yeah, after traveling out to meet her, I spent about 15 hours with her over the course of 2 days. We just clicked, and it was just natural. And I remember coming back from that holiday feeling really wholesome, like really, really wholesome and really positive, which was which stood at a stark contrast to how I always felt. So yeah, this was 2 months into speaking to her, into the relationship, let's say. And by that point, I had already managed to confide in her some of my most deepest and most vulnerable secrets and experiences that helped me, or not helped me, but had shaped me as a person. I felt comfortable revealing this stuff to her because, once again, I felt like I was speaking to myself. But I think that kind of speaks more of her personality. Very caring and warm. I was very drawn to that. So I remember coming back from that first trip and sending her messages relating to sort of spirituality, discussing God, and coming into just like full alignment in life. And I sat down for a meditation. I remember asking myself, trying to speak to a higher self within me, I suppose, as to why finally things had begun to align themselves in my life, and I could be in this relationship, or at least that it looked like I was going to experience that romantic future for the first time at 26, 27. At that point, I remember feeling this experience was about several minutes of really deep rapture and healing, and I began to sob, like really, really really strongly. Tears running down my face. And I felt like I was in the presence of an all-loving deity, and it was protecting me. This experience stands out in memory as really, really powerful and moving. In those sort of beginning stages of the relationship, I had began to heal a lot of what happened to me in childhood and some of the conditioning that I had, I guess, grown into, or had, some barriers that I had put up over, I suppose, decades. So that's where the healing came from, I suppose. Just being open with another person romantically, being vulnerable. I mean, truly vulnerable. Like, I cried a lot because for the first time in my life, things had started to actually align with the future that I wanted, which was a familial one. So we had a long distance thing going on for a bit. Actually, we always had a long distance thing going on for a bit, but so I kept meeting each other, getting to know each other more and more, going on walks, exploring churches, just talking to each other, getting to know each other more. I want to know everything about this person. I feel so drawn to this person that, it was just, I was a conduit for some kind of really powerful thing happening. I had felt. There was one experience where I remember we went to a restaurant, and I remember she had sat across from where I was sitting, and I remember there was a particular way that the light had fallen on her face, and I remember looking at her and thinking, I'm not attracted to this person, and there's something off. I remember thinking in my head thereafter that, it's really vain. You have a really beautiful person in front of you, like a really, someone else who's truly a spiritual being like me. As vain as that sounds. I didn't pay attention to that at all. Just kind of went about my day. As the relationship approached sort of more, physical touch and intimacy, I kind of struggled with that a little bit, because that's obviously something that I've never done. It's not something I've ever led on or anything of that sort. So I struggled to express it. It was difficult for me to kiss. My body just it would ask, but it just wouldn't. It was like a stop and start. It wasn't free flowing. I wrote this off as anxiety. And there was anxiety too, because this was obviously something that I struggled with growing up. Several months into the relationship, I remember she invited me to go on holiday together. By this point, we still hadn't kissed. And it was probably maybe 2 months in. We'd only really meet like once every 2 weeks. So maybe that was sort of, I don't know, 6 or 7 times after we had met each other. So, you should probably lean in for a kiss by that point if you really like that person. And this invitation to go on holiday really kind of freaked me out. I had told her that I wasn't sure that I'd want to do that. Just please allow me to think it through. And then I had thought it through, and I said I wasn't ready. The thing that was going through my head at the time was, if I can't even kiss the girl, then I don't stand a chance at a serious relationship in the slightest. And then I remember confessing to her over text that if I can't do it, if I can't kiss her soon, then we should not pursue the relationship any further. That's just how I felt at the time. And it's embarrassing. Like, a grown man can't bloody lean in for a kiss. So that kind of threw a spanner in the works, and obviously that really got to her. And basically she called me up, and she was like, what the hell? Because she was also really connected to me, and I'm giving her this kind of like, I think I'm looking for like a, what am I trying to say here? Corrective information, I guess, but she just must be thinking like, what is this guy even saying? And she sort of over text and over phone, she basically accused me of not really aiming at a serious relationship. That I should probably go and explore short-term flings, she said. Which I understand. And that phone conversation obviously ended on an unpleasant note, but we didn't break up. But it really hit me in the heart. And I remember, basically, I was living out at the time. I wasn't living with my parents. I remember I came back to my mum's house for the first time in several months. And basically came back for like existential comfort, because I was kind of really in a strange space. And I remember I actually had an emotional breakdown in the night. Didn't sleep for the entire night. I was basically repeating like a mantra throughout the night. I give up, I give up, I give up. Felt really dissociated. Now on the following day, I had sent her a couple messages, and she expressed the fact that she wasn't really in a good place, and I called her up, and I was saying, what's up? And she basically pivoted the conversation towards whether I had experienced any intimacy before in my life, like sexual intimacy. And that obviously brought up childhood trauma. And she was kind of prodding at it, rightly so, I suppose, trying to find out what on earth is going on, why I had the reaction that I showed. And towards the end of that conversation, she said that we should just remain friends. And at that point, I remember that in spite of kind of all the healing and all the investment that I had put into the relationship, that, if we remain as friends means, maybe some people want to remain as friends, but I think for the most part that just means, sorry, I'm looking for someone else. And that was fine. I was like, it's okay. Like it hit a little bit, but it's okay. And then she said, "But do you still want to come to the town where do you want to still come visit me?" I thought that was kind of bizarre. Okay, what are boundaries? What's going on? She said, "Yeah, we can't really hold hands or anything of that sort, but we can chat to each other." And then half an hour later, she sends me a text saying that she still wants romance. So, fair enough. Yeah, I guess we can carry on as normal. By this point in the relationship, I had realised that I have to escalate physical intimacy were I to stand a chance of it having any kind of long-term potential. My mental health really started to slip after that emotional breakdown. So, yeah, pretty much beyond that point, it got more physical pretty quickly. That also meant that things got a bit more turbulent in terms of my psyche. I started to wake up habitually at 4 a.m. in the morning for pretty much the first time in my life. Experiencing really powerful existential dread in the morning. Experiencing abandonment anxiety and things of that sort. And just kind of anxiously awaiting how the relationship would unfold. There was a lot of visceral fear. So I kissed my ex for the first time around Valentine's Day and basically travelled out to the city where she lived, and it was quite a nice day actually. Went to the pub, but the day before I had met her, I remember going to bed at 7:30 and waking up at 11:30. So I didn't even make it into the night. I was so anxious, so pathetic. Grown man can't even bloody lean in for a kiss. God forbid. Get rid of these guys. So yeah, quickly but surely our relationship became more physical after that point, and basically a month after I first kissed her, I travelled out to her place to spend the night at hers, which is where we made out for the first time. French kissed. And in the relationship, that was the first inkling of, for me personally, where I felt that something was off. I remember not feeling much, and I remember her enjoying it a lot more than I did. That something wasn't quite right. But I didn't understand. Like, I wasn't going to freak out. Maybe it's just shit. But I was kind of acting, unintentionally. I didn't jump to any conclusions. A fortnight later, we went on holiday for my birthday, and that's where the relationship had reached its carnal stage. We obviously tried to connect sexually. I'm just thinking through how much detail I want to go into here. It was really lackluster. There was no electricity, and I just felt off. Like, what's going on here? I felt, but it didn't freak me out either. Like, it was just kind of, I was just enjoying my company with this girl. She had given me some gifts. She travelled out with me, and we had a really, we were connected, and we felt we were in a bond. So I'll spare the details, but yeah, we went to the restaurant after, just laughing and feeling really warm, and joyful. The following day, we were still in the town that I went to on holiday, and we're having a picnic, and we were laughing together again. And I remember losing myself in her eyes, and I remember I started to cry, and not sobbing, but just sort of gently crying, passing tears, feeling peaceful. And I remember my body feeling up and became awash with a sense of warmth throughout, a full body sensation. And I remember my sense of time, so my experience of time became timeless for about 5 seconds or so. I'd never experienced anything like that before. I think I was really, really in love with her. So after coming back from holiday with my ex, where I had lost my virginity to her, I, as usual, remember waking up at 4 a.m. on that day. People shouldn't be waking up at 4 a.m. It's not normal. And I went to the gym, as I had done for months, years. I remember sort of leaving my house, and passing beneath the bridge next to the station of where I basically lived. And I remember I saw an advertisement of underneath this bridge, and there was this man's face on it. And I remember being drawn to it in a kind of profound way that I had never experienced ever. That's bizarre. How bizarre is that? I didn't think anything of it. And then I arrived at the gym, and I remember basically freaking out because I couldn't look at other men, because the sense of attraction that I felt was so powerful. What had happened was that my libido had increased by like 10 times compared to the normal. Much more powerful than I had ever experienced in my entire life. And it only increased for men, not for women, like barely for women. Excuse me. And it was so strong that I felt like I had gone insane. And there was this kind of an ambiance of psychoactivity. Like it almost felt like the world was, all the inanimate objects in the world were living things. It was that trippy. My libido had increased, and it actually brought my sexuality to the fore of experience in a kind of profound way that I had never experienced before. It was almost like waking up for the first time. Either on that day or the day after, I remember basically laying in bed and putting the two and two together and thinking, like I think I might have just always been gay. But it wasn't like that. And it wasn't like an instant acceptance. in light of what I wanted to achieve in life, and the kind of the struggles that are associated with living out as a gay man, really difficult to accept, extremely difficult. So I remember laying in bed, excuse me, and I started to hallucinate. I had seen, so on my left, I had seen a naked body of a woman, and on my right there was a naked body of a man, and they were kind of swaying like this, in a kind of suggestive fashion, and kind of like the painting Dance by Matisse. And then for several days thereafter, I remember waking up and I had stuck thoughts, basically like a thought suspended in consciousness for several hours after waking up, like here, just going about your day, kind of, and there's like a thought stuck in your head. It's almost really palpable, like right here, and it's really unbearable. I was freaking out. On top of everything else that was happening at the time, the kind of the surreal nature of it all, and really difficult time. Basically, yeah, it dawned on me that I'm here, I'm a gay man, there you are, and I have been all these years. But I didn't accept it. I kept telling myself, no, I'm bi. I can't be gay. I'm in love with my girlfriend. That kind of cognitive dissonance was the most like earth-shattering thing, probably of my entire life. Just the palpable weight of that realization was just so intense. You go living life having a straight identity, and then all of a sudden that's completely eviscerated within the case of a day. Within the span of a day, and you're just an entirely different person. It felt like my personality started to like split, and like two parts of my brain spoke to each other that had never spoken before. I basically managed to decompartmentalize my attraction to men, and explain it away from basically my entire life, to some degree, notwithstanding the experiences I had, when I was 18 or 23, speaking to my therapist, and basically that stuff never really nested in my identity, and it just wasn't part of who I was. So I found it difficult to accept, and I clung to this idea of being a bisexual. I can't be gay. Gay men can't start families. And that was my kind of dream, to start a family, and that was the thing that I had dreamt of as a thing that I want to pursue in this world, in order to heal myself from the deep both sorrow or difficulty of life itself. And there was kind of a redemption and salvation in the familial ideal. And I think that entire period of basically losing my virginity and realizing that I was gay 2 days later, was accompanied by basically unreality for longer than a couple of days. Just moment to moment intensity, just being skyrocketing, and just sort of general chaos. By far the most unhealthiest I had ever felt, by a wide margin. I remember finding myself in a situation where I basically, that I feared that would come from my exercise, that she would be the one who would have to actually, call things off. And I just couldn't believe that this was the end. And I couldn't accept that. I had become the one who was the villain of my own fears. I would have to break up and hurt the person you love. I'd have to reveal that I had only figured out that I have this orientation at 27. The negative reaction that she would have to that, having to deal with the first breakup and the grief and the loss associated with that, accepting that eventually I'll not have any contact with her, and having to accept that, having to accept loneliness that I've dealt with for so many years, that I've struggled with for so many years. So I felt utterly paralyzed, like completely paralyzed and overwhelmed every day. Like for a good 3 months, I'd come into work and I would start blushing if someone attractive walked in. And I'm thinking about the fact that, I have a girlfriend who I love, and just the level of cognitive dissonance there is just insane. And it was exhausting. Like, completely exhausting. And I felt like there wasn't an option that I could take. So, yeah, it felt like my world was imploding. Soon thereafter, after we had tried to connect sexually, over the course of the next several months, I had still tried to connect sexually with my ex-girlfriend, and it was obviously unsuccessful. I won't go into the details, but it felt like an act. There was some arousal, but it wasn't who I was, and I couldn't derive much pleasure from it, it just wasn't. I couldn't connect that way. We weren't biologically meant for each other in that sense. And I kept having this imposter thing, and I was acting out because I wanted to connect that way. I really did, and I wanted her to feel a connection with me like that. But my biology just wouldn't allow it. I remember about 2 months after we had first tried, I sent her a text saying, I'm kind of struggling with this. Please just give me time. This was my attempt to let out some of that truth without sabotaging the relationship, because I still wasn't in a place where I could just let go. I was still processing all this stuff. But in order to save myself, I would have to let out some of the truth. That was the only thing I could do at the time where I had felt it could be safe to do that. And this freaked her out. She said basically that she's pursuing me sexually. And she was right. She said that there's already a lot more emotional intimacy in this relationship than there is any physical intimacy. So she was right. And foreseeing the eventual breakup, that text entailed. I mean, she didn't actually want to break up because of that text. She wanted to speak about it. But I remember basically freaking out. Like, I had a panic attack, like, for the first time in several years after that text. Started hyperventilating. My hands started to shake. Started to get pins and needles in them. I started to have really, really shallow breath. Fell on my bed, shaking. Because that's what the breakup meant to me, like death. And I remember trying to call the Samaritans twice, and they didn't pick up. And then I called my mum, and she said, "Breathe, deep breaths." And I had started to calm down a little bit, and then I remember just sort of speaking to her about everything, and I remember I started to experience mania. And I stood up and I kicked twice my cupboard in my room. Just wanting to kick the shit out of it, you know? Ow! So I did that. So that kind of anger I never really ever experienced ever. Like, I can't, unless I'm arguing with my mum or something, and it's like a really big argument, but that doesn't ever happen in my life. So that was a first. That felt really foreign to who I actually am. I beg your pardon. So I basically hid in a closet for 3 months whilst I was in love with my ex-girlfriend, pretending that I felt our intimacy, because I wanted to, but I just couldn't feel it. But I'd still fantasize about her sexually, whilst experiencing an attraction that was much more powerful towards other men. And every kind of iota of arousal that I had felt from thinking about my ex, I would grip onto, like grip on for dear life. Because I couldn't imagine losing something that was so dear to me, that I had waited for 10 years. Losing something that I had waited for 10 years over something as secondary as sexuality in a relationship, you know. And those 3 months, and several, so there's 3 months after the initial sexual contact, and the 3 months or so after breaking up, it was the worst months of my entire life. At least at the start, it was just all anxiety and intermittent panic and feeling like I would die if I fell asleep. That happened several times. Just unending darkness and hopelessness, and being at work and not being able to concentrate, having to stand up just to relax, and calling my mum just to comfort me, and that was rough every day. And it was only really once I accepted my situation, which was extremely difficult, and gained the courage to actually come out to my family, my close friends, and then my ex-girlfriend, that things got better. I really feared that no one would accept me, and I'd lose all of my close relationships. I mean, this is just a kind of a cliche thing that happens to every single gay person, so yeah. I came out to my girlfriend 3 months after we first connected sexually, on holiday, after we had sex. the thing that, so once I had accepted the fact that we can no longer be together, that was pretty much that. I remember we tried to have sex, and I remember her asking me in the moment whether I had liked it or not. And at that moment, I remember I felt like something like a lightning had struck my head, and I sort of rolled over and just said, "Let's go to bed," and couldn't sleep well into the night for like 2 or 3 hours. Just couldn't sleep. I think she couldn't sleep either because I wasn't asleep, and I sat up on the side of the bed and I said, "I'm so sorry. I think I'm homosexual." I uttered that and just broke down crying. Remember, she paused in disbelief, and then after a couple of seconds, her head collapsed on the pillow. She started to cry as well. I won't go through everything that we discussed that night, but the thing that stands out is that I was the first person with whom that she felt she could actually start a family and had a familial future potentially with. I was in the same place as her. I sobbed for the entire night. I didn't actually sleep at all that night. In keeping with all of these other times that this has happened in my relationship. And I cried out so much. It was an extremely cathartic emotional release. But it wasn't pleasant. Yeah. The following morning, she didn't sleep too much that night, maybe a couple hours. And the following morning, she basically expressed the fact that she didn't believe me and that she thought that I was bi. And that was a kind of, I guess, a suspension of belief. And she was mirroring that. So similar to myself, that I couldn't believe at the start that I had found myself in a situation. And as soon as I had revealed that, she couldn't understand where she had found herself. And this is where I made many mistakes. Basically, I remember basically in a state of delirium because I didn't sleep. But, for 3 months I had been struggling with this thing, and she said, well, I had been struggling with everything that I just described in this video. And she said, "It can't be. You're bi." And at that point, I told her a half truth, half lie, because a lot of this stuff is just grey. And I said, "I am." When in reality, I had accepted the fact that I'm mostly gay. I had realised that, in hindsight, I realised that that would be the last time I would actually ever get to see her. And I was also experiencing really intrusive suicidal ideation on the day, in a delirious state, because I hadn't slept at all. So several hours later, she forgave me and accepted me. But I think at that point, in the depth of our psyches, the separation, or at least the separation process, had begun long before from my side, but that's when it also began for her. And there was some sexual contact that thereafter again shouldn't have happened. I was once again just acting in the moment, not thinking anything through, and just being controlled by her being, just completely being surrendered to the bond that we had for each other. And I know that you can't really argue away agency, so I made mistakes. But I knew that would be the last time I'd ever actually get to be with her. Several days upon returning home, so 2 days after that experience of coming out to her and then saying I'm bi, sorry, I'm just going to find the section that I had been reading. Here we are. Several days after returning home, having spoken to someone who went through a similar story, so another chap who also went through something similar, and they also told themselves for the longest time that they were bi. Having actually had a full night's sleep, and having had my rational faculties returned, I broke up with my ex over the phone. I regret how I did it. I should have done it in person, and I wanted to. There was just so much had happened that I was just. See, I said that my rational faculties had returned, but they clearly hadn't. I wasn't in a place to actually sit down and just say we couldn't be together. I had just been like carrying this massive load on my back for like 3 months. I've just dumped all of it. I'm done. I don't want to respect bloody social boundaries. I'm so tired. Just came out during a conversation over the phone. Yeah, I regret how I did it, but broke up with her in a cowardly fashion, and I accepted my fate. Yeah, that was the most difficult thing that I had ever had to do by far, by a wide margin. I know that going forward in life there'll be more difficult things to deal with and things of that sort, but at the time it was the most difficult thing ever. Yeah, I just couldn't bear the absurdity of my situation and the experiences of those 3 months and the never-ending grip that she had over me, and the ineffable, surreal nature of it all. We weren't meant for each other, and the onus was on me to accept and to let go. I will always regret how I did it, because hindsight is 20/20. My ex accused me of using her to understand my own sexuality. She was deeply hurt by the fact that I withheld the truth from her for so long. Like this entire fiasco was the most meaningful and significant but tumultuous period of my entire life. And I suppose that in terms of concluding remarks, I just want to say that in the midst of it all, there was never really a triumphant moment of coming out or anything of that sort. There was no pride or redemption. It was all just sad. Just really, really sad. My dream of starting a nuclear family died in this beautiful but terrifying experience. And this is obviously something that I will struggle to accept. Not being able to have kids.